Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're back on part 2. So I want to quickly just review what we did last week for those of you who were there. I think pretty much everybody. We talked about the decisions that you should make and whether you should go to college, whether it's a good idea, and if you decide to do that, why it would be worth the money. And those include things like advantages in pay and employment, and that you need to decide what kind of degree you want, what kind of school you want to go to, and the cost and how you're going to pay for those costs. So what we said last week was we're going to spend all of this week's talk about how to fund going to college, whether it's for you or your children or some other relatives. So today we're going to talk about grants, scholarships, money that you can get from the federal government, from the US government, money that you could get from the state, from Maryland, getting student loans, choosing a lender if you have to go to a private lender, which could be a bank or another company, how to save for college, and then when you decide that you're ready to go to college, what you should do next. And just as a reminder, in May, we have another 2-part series that's going to be about continuing education and other types of continuing education to be things like community college or looking to get a trade as opposed to a 4-year college degree. Okay, so let's just start real basic with what are grants and scholarships. They're money that you can get to go to school, and they fund you, and you might not have to pay the money back. And the two things, they're a little different. Grants are from the federal government or the state government or the college. And then scholarships usually are from other places, from companies, from nonprofits and community groups. And Anne is going to talk to you about all of those things in a little bit more detail now.
All right, so first, let's talk about grants. So as Deb just said, grants are money from the federal or state government or the college. You usually do not have to pay the money back. However, sometimes under a couple of different circumstances, you do have to pay the money back. So for example, if you receive additional funds or additional money from another place, you may have to pay some of the grant back. And also definitely if you drop a course or courses, you will have to pay some of the money back. Okay, so just be aware of that. Usually application's very simple. We'll be talking about that in a minute. Awards are usually need-based. That means that on the form, it will ask you how much income you have, how many savings you have, that kind of thing. And if you do not have enough income or savings, you will be more likely to get some kind of grant. Okay, so if you don't have enough money to pay for college, you're more likely to be getting a grant. And you usually do have to apply every single year. Okay, so the grant will be just for 1 year and you just apply every year. So on the next slide, now let's talk about the other main source of funding, which is scholarships. As Deb said, this is money that comes usually from companies, nonprofit organizations, or community groups, for example, churches. You do not have to pay this money back. And this is very important. There is not a limit to the number of scholarships that you can get. So if you can find 10 different scholarships, then you can apply for all of those. And if you get those 10 different scholarships, you can use all of that money, okay? Just because you get one scholarship doesn't mean that you can't get another one. Usually they're awarded based on something like your grades. So if you have a child who's going off to college, their high school grades are very, very important. It can be based on some kind of talent. So for example, you might get a sports scholarship, or you might get a scholarship because the college you apply to has a fabulous orchestra and they really need that violin player. Okay, so it can be based on a talent or a skill that you have, or it can be based on a number of other things. Scholarships tend to be very competitive. So the larger ones in particular are very, very competitive. So try looking for some of the smaller scholarships, okay? Some of those scholarships that are thousands and thousands of dollars, there's going to be thousands and thousands of people applying for them. But the sorts of scholarships that are $100, $500, you might get many less people applying, so that you might have a better chance of actually winning that scholarship, okay? It does take time to fill out. The more that the scholarship is giving a larger sum of money, the longer and more complicated the application is likely to be. And it may include things like an essay, okay? So be very aware that you need to start looking for these scholarships early, because sometimes there is a lot required from you by way of the application, okay? Again, sometimes you have to apply for these every year. Sometimes scholarships are awarded for all, 4 years that you're going to be at college. So sometimes this requires an application every year, sometimes not. And some examples of these community group scholarships or other scholarships might be sometimes if you're an employee of a company, especially a very big company, so maybe the size of something like Target or Walmart, if you work for those companies, look out, they may have scholarship opportunities that you can apply for. Sometimes churches have smaller scholarships for their members. And definitely if you're a child of a veteran, someone who has served in the American Armed Services, then there are definitely scholarships out there that you can apply for. So now, how do I find out more about federal grants? This is grants from the federal government. So we give you a website here. So it's www.studentaid.gov. And I'm just going to mention to you a couple of things that you'll find on this website. The main federal government grant is called the Federal Pell Grant. Okay, so this is a very key grant. It's definitely one that everybody wants to apply for. It's for undergraduates. And this year, the maximum amount that you can be awarded for this grant is $6,345. Okay, it changes from year to year. So you can be awarded all that money or just some of that money, okay? Depends on your need. There's also another grant on this website called the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. You don't need to remember that name. This is a different grant, so you can apply for this as well. The form will be there and it will explain to you how to do it. This can be also up to $4,000. Okay, so those are both very good grants. And we give you an example of a couple of other grants that are here. The first one is if you want to be a teacher. And the second one is if you yourself have been in the armed forces and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, do look at this website. It has those two main grants on it, which are really important for you to consider. Now that was federal grants. How do I find out more about state grants or scholarships? So again, we gave you the website here. It's the Maryland Higher Education Commission website, which is mhec.maryland.gov. There's a lot on this website. I'm not going to go through everything. We listed here a few things for the kinds of grants that they give. Probably the main one that you might be considering would be what's called the 2+2 transfer scholarship. And this is a grant that becomes applicable that you can apply for if you do 2 years at a community college in Maryland and then 2 years at a state university in Maryland. Okay, so you have to go to both colleges in Maryland, a community college and then a 4-year college. Okay, 2 years at each. And actually the maximum amount for this grant is usually about $1,000. So again, that one is well worth looking at, but there are a lot of other grants on this website. So do your research carefully and read them all because there's a lot of information here. And then just a couple of other websites here. So you might want to find out a lot more about scholarships because this is a very complicated subject. There are a lot of scholarships out there. So 2 websites that we've listed here, FastWeb and Tuition Funding Sources. These websites both work the same way. They have you fill out a profile and then they sort of match what you've put in your profile to available scholarships. Okay, so for example, maybe if you fill out that you're female, there may be scholarships that are just applicable to females. If you're, say, going for becoming somebody in the healthcare industry, there will be scholarships particularly appropriate to that. If you're a woman in the healthcare industry, there might be even particular scholarships for that. So this has a lot of information. And on both websites, it works the same. You fill out a profile and then it automatically matches you to some scholarships that you can apply for. Okay, does anybody have any questions so far or we good? Otherwise, back to Deb.
Okay, so Anne told you about grants and scholarships, and those are very complicated things, but a lot of places that you can go to help find money to fund your college. But maybe that's not enough, right? Because it's very expensive to go to college. And we talked about that last time, that the cost could be a lot of money. So if you still need more money to go to college, even after you've gotten scholarships and grants, you have to look at other ways to fund that. So one of them is a student loan. And when you have a student loan, you have to pay it back. And so we're going to talk about student loans either for you or for your children or other people. Like we said last week, you have to determine how much debt you can handle, how much money you're going to have to owe and pay back, and you have to be able to afford that. And we want you to shop for the best deal. What does that mean? It means you want to find the best way to get money that will be good for you in the long run so that you can afford it and you can pay it back. And there are loans from the federal government, from the US government. There are loans from private companies and banks. And those we're going to talk about in a lot more detail in a few minutes. There are also what they call work-study jobs, usually from the college, and that could be things like working in the maintenance department and in the cafeterias and some of the other places that the college needs help. They will pay you not a huge amount of money, but some money to take a job, and that will be counted towards the cost of going to college. And then there's also another website. We've given you a lot of websites today. There's a website here for Montgomery College specifically. And I know a few of you told us last week that you were considering Montgomery College. That is an assistance to low-income individuals who live in Montgomery County. So if you believe that you might qualify for that, that's also a very good program to look at to see if you could get funding from them. Any questions so far? Put it in the chat box or raise your hand or turn on your camera and let us know. Okay, I'm gonna keep going then, okay? So This is a very, very important thing. You need to know how much debt can you handle? How much money will you owe that you will be able to pay back? So the first bullet that says repayment should be affordable, that means you have to know that you can pay back the money that you're borrowing. It's very, very important. There's a lot of student loan debt out in the economy. There's a lot of newspaper articles about this. And so you need to be careful, okay? And usually we say it should be 10% or less of the postgraduate income after taxes. Very complicated math. We give you a website that will help you do the calculation so you don't have to do it yourself, okay? And that's right here. And you're gonna get a copy of this presentation from Raul afterwards, just like always, okay? So let's just do an example. So we have Maria. Maria's a made up person. She's not real, but we're just gonna pretend. And Maria's planning to go to a four-year college, okay? So she just got out of high school. She wants to go to a four-year college and she plans to be an accountant. She knows what an accountant can make when they go out after they graduate from college and they go get a job. She thinks that she's going to make about $50,000 a year. Now remember, $50,000 a year is her salary. They're going to take taxes out of it. She's not going to take it all home. So we're going to just go through how much can she borrow for her college education. Okay, again, I'm not going to take you through all the numbers because we're just going to say that the loan calculator figured it out. But again, her salary is going to have taxes taken out by her employer. She also needs to still pay for all of the usual living expenses. She has to pay for her rent. She has to pay for her food. And then on top of that, she has to figure out how much she can pay back for the loans that she's taking out. So we're assuming here that she didn't get any scholarships or grants. She's having to pay for this all herself, and she has to borrow money on the student loan. She has to make sure she has enough. So the loan calculator did the work for us to tell her that the borrowed amount that she can take out is $26,800 for all 4 years of college. So not for each year, for all 4 years. So about $6,000 a year, okay? And it's going to take 10 years, 10 years, that's a lot of years to pay it all back, okay? So I'm going to stop and I'm going to ask you to talk to us or put it in the chat box of what do you think we learned about from looking at Maria's example. Marisol, what do you think?
Could you repeat, please?
Yes, so she has to borrow $26,800. She can borrow up to that amount for 4 years, but it's going to take her 10 years to pay it off if she does that. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's a good thing, a bad thing? Do you think that there are things that you want to tell Maria?
Well, I think she had a bad idea because it's a long time to pay rates and it's high.
It's a very long time, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, so she needs to cut some things or no.
Yeah, she's going to need to decide if that's really what she wants to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Mimi, what do you think? Mimi, are you with us? Adi?
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think about Maria's example?
So, I think Maria can reduce his the year by paying or by carrying his money or his salary, her salary. So.
Okay, so you think it's a lot of money also, and that she needs to think about it. So yeah, I think it's very important when you're looking at loans that you know how much you can borrow, and then you know how much you can pay back and how long. And you might decide that you don't want to go to school full time, you want to work part-time during the same thing, or you might decide that you want to try to borrow money from your relatives more than from the bank so you don't have to pay interest. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You might want to go back to all of those things and talk to you about of really looking into scholarships and grants and finding out how much money you can get from the federal government or from the state or from the county or from the college to get more money so that you don't have to borrow so much. Okay, because it is a very, very big thing to borrow money and to have to pay it back, because you are legally responsible to pay that money back. And if you don't, it can affect a lot of things, because then the people who loaned you that money, they can put notices out, and it can affect whether you get a job again in the future, and it can affect whether you can get money to buy a car or a house. So you just need to think about that. You need to be very, very, very careful about these loans. Does anybody else want to tell us anything about that? Have you had any experience with looking for loans for college yet? No? Okay, then I'm going to give it back to Anne.
All right, so let's take a little closer look at shopping for the best deal. Because as Deb just said, loans can be very, very expensive. And so shopping for the best deal is really, really important before you decide on which loan that you want to take out. So you can get a loan from the federal government, as we mentioned. And these tend to be very good deals because they tend to have the lowest interest rate. The interest rate tends to be fixed. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you're given an interest rate, let's just say 4%, and then the interest rate stays the same all the time that you have the loan, okay? If, on the other hand, it was a variable interest rate, that would mean that it could change, okay? So it's much better for you if it's a fixed interest rate, especially if it's a low fixed interest rate, because then you know how much you're going to be responsible for paying back, okay? If the interest rate is variable, it could be something this month and then it could be a whole lot more money next month, okay? So you want to avoid that. You like a fixed interest rate. Also, these loans are not usually payable until you graduate. So that's what deferred means. It means it's put off. So the interest payments are put off until you actually graduate. Okay, so that's much better than having to start paying the interest before you even graduate. On the other hand, loans from private companies like banks and other institutions, these usually tend to have a higher interest rate. And even if it's only a little bit higher, that can really add up if you've got the loan for, let's say, you know, a number of years, as we just saw with Maria. If she's going to have the loan for 10 years, even a little bit higher is going to be a lot of extra money by the end of the 10 years. As I just mentioned, these tend to have a variable interest rate rather than a fixed rate, which makes things less predictable for you. Sometimes the interest payment can start immediately. So you can be paying back interest even before you graduate. And
so Anne, why don't you just explain the difference between the principal and the interest there?
Oh, yes. So this is only the interest that you would be paying back. So the principal, that's a word that is used, and it means the amount of money that you borrow. Okay, so that amount does not include the interest or even late fees or things like that, which are added on. It simply means the beginning amount that you borrowed. So say if you borrow $10,000, then that $10,000 is the principal. That is not usually repayable until after you graduate, no matter who the lender is. But the interest on that is what can be payable back before you graduate. Okay, so, but the principal itself will never be payable usually until after you graduate. Is everybody clear on that? And another thing to be very careful of is if the student has very little income, it might be required that somebody co-sign or becomes a co-signer for that loan. Now, this means that the co-signer is accepting responsibility for the repayment of that loan if the student or the student's family does not repay that loan. Okay, so that's called defaulting on the loan. So if you can't pay your loan, you default, then the person who co-signed the loan becomes responsible. So be really, really careful about becoming a co-signer on a loan, because you have to be really, really sure that you trust the person whose loan it is to pay it back. Okay, otherwise you will become legally responsible for that loan. Okay, so that's a big thing to be careful of. And actually, the same applies to car loans and any other loan. If you're a co-signer, you become responsible for that loan if the original person does not pay it back. And one very important thing that I cannot stress enough, do not use your credit card to pay for tuition and room and board for college. Okay, sometimes it's okay to make small payments, like if you need textbooks, you can put those on a credit card, but do not ever put these large amounts like tuition payments and room and board and those big amounts of money, do not put them on your credit card, because the credit card interest rate is always going to be the highest of any kind of loan. Okay, so if you learn one thing today, learn do not use your credit card to pay for college. All right, so on to our next slide. Now, how do I choose the best private lender? We've been told, remember, that there are various people you can go to, the bank and other places. So it's very important that you think about your financial situation before you go and see the bank or anyone else to ask about loans, okay? So you have to have figured out how much you're going to need to borrow or the amount of the loan. You're going to ask yourself if you really prefer a variable or a fixed interest rate, as we just mentioned. Decide how much your family might be able to support you. Okay, so if your family can give you some money towards this, then that will mean you have to borrow less. Okay, so be very careful that you take that into account. You will be looking to see how much you can get in the form of grant money and scholarship money. Okay, so obviously the more that you get in grants and scholarships, the less you will have to borrow in these loans. So that's going to be something you really, really want to concentrate on first, is getting as much money as you can from grants and scholarships. And you're also going to think very carefully about the type of degree or the area of study. As we talked about a lot last week, there are all sorts of reasons people go to college. People can study all sorts of things. just be very, very careful that if you're an adult going back to college, that you really are sure that what you're studying for is going to be a good idea. And we gave you a lot of thoughts about that last week. So you're going to be thinking about all of those things so that you have a plan and then you know how much roughly you want to borrow. Then you're going to look online. So there's tons and tons of information online. A good place to start is to Google something like best student loan providers. And the web will come up with all sorts of websites that will talk to you about different student loan providers. And you'll do your research and compare them all. Okay, so go to at least several websites and compare all the different lenders, because they will all charge different interest rates. They'll all have different requirements. They'll all have different forms to fill in. And you want to be sure that you are getting the best deal. Okay, and then you're going to look and see what they can offer you, and you're going to do a big comparison. So you're going to choose what looks like the best ones, but then you're going to make big lists of, you know, what you need as opposed to what each lender is going to be able to give you. Okay, so very, very important here, again, that you do as much research as possible so that you get yourself the best deal. So now, how can I save for college? So I'm going to ask you all, firstly, who among you all listening today is already saving for college? And are you saving for your kids or for yourself? And how are you saving money? So would anyone like to tell me that? Who they're saving for and how they're saving money?
Come on, you guys. You were talking to us about last week. You can put it in the chat box.
Yeah, you're going to community college to save money.
Yeah, so are you saving money?
Yeah.
How are you saving?
Not yet.
Oh, not yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Is anybody saving yet?
I'm saving.
In the middle of this pandemic is a little difficult.
Well, I'm saving money, yeah, for my some career in this year. So I opened the account.
Okay, good.
All right, so it looks as if one or two people have started thinking a little bit about saving. We're going to talk a little bit more about that because it's a very important thing when you're planning to go to college. It's very expensive, so the more that you can save ahead of time, the better. So there's really a couple of different ways that you can save. You can have a personal account, like at a bank, just sort of a savings account of some sort, or you can have what's called a state 529 plan. And I'll be talking about that in a minute. Very important, the last point here, does it matter how much time you have? So obviously, yes, the more time that you have to save, the better plan you can find if you have, say, 5 to 10 years before you need to pay for college. So, for example, if you have a child who's 8 years old, if you want to start saving for them to go to college when they're 18, you have 10 years to save and make a good plan. If you even have a child who's 13 or 14, it's really good to make a plan now because you still have a few years before you need to come up with that money. Okay, and then even if you only have a year or two, do start thinking about it now. You'll be able to save less and maybe have a bit less good plan, but still you will be able to save something. And as we've just shown, saving anything will mean that you do not have to borrow as much money. So it's really worthwhile trying to save as soon as you possibly can. Okay, and now we're going to go over some ways that we can do that. So, for example, banks all have savings account choices. So you can have personal savings account. It can be for you if you're the one wanting to go to college. It can be for your child or another relative if that's the person going to college. So you will get the most interest if you can keep the money in there for a long time, and also if the money that you deposit is bigger. Okay, so the more money you can put in and the longer you can keep it in the bank, the more that the bank is going to give you by way of interest. Okay, and just be careful here too. If you have to withdraw that money early, then there may be some penalties for early withdrawal. Okay, not usually in a regular savings account, but in some of the slightly more special or long-term savings kind of accounts. Okay, so for example, we talked about this back in banking, but if there's a certificate of deposit, that might require that you keep it for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or longer, and that will have a very good rate of interest. So that's a kind of way of saving at the bank, but it does require that you keep the money in the bank for a certain amount of time. Okay, if you draw it out early, there'll be a penalty. But the bank has plenty of ways for you to save money. So do talk to them. You know, go into your bank and say, I'd like to save for college for me or my child. You know, what's the best way for me to do that? And they will help you. Okay, and then finally, another way that we just spoke about is called the State 529 account. Now, these are really good ways to save, and you might not have heard of these before. So each state has its own 529 plan. The Maryland 529 plan is managed not by the state of Maryland, but by an institution. And in this case, the institution is called T. Rowe Price. Okay, so in each state, that state's 529 plan will be managed by a different institution. Okay, now this is very important. Just because you live and will be going to college in Maryland does not mean that you can only use the Maryland 529 plan. Anyone who lives anywhere or goes to college anywhere can use the 529 plan of any state in the USA. Okay, and it's open to both children and adults. So it doesn't matter if you're a child going to college or if you're an adult who's worked for a few years and then going back to study more. Okay, these plans are open to everybody. They can only be used for education expenses. So if you open a 529 plan, you must use it for education expenses like tuition, room and board, textbooks, that kind of thing. Okay. Each plan will ask you some questions. So usually the questions are, what kind of investment would you like to use in your plan? And it will give you some options. It will say, here's investment plan number 1, or here's investment plan number 2, or here's investment plan number 3. And then you will look at all those plans and compare them. And there'll be people that you can talk to at the institution like T. Rowe Price, who may be able to give you some guidance on which option. Okay, but essentially you're going to be putting money in that plan, and then you're going to, when you take out the money for college, going to get it free of federal taxes. Okay, so the interest that you earn on that plan, you do not have to pay federal taxes on that money, which is really good. So that's a good reason to have that plan. And the contributions can start as little as $25. So you can actually open one of these plans with $25. And again, if you go on and Google 529 plans, I did some Googling, and some state plans are much better because they give you more interest than other state plans. So be sure to try and Google, some various state plans in different states. I think I just Googled best 529 state plan, and it came up and it gave me all sorts of information about different plans in different states. Okay, so again, you can use any plan in any state. And why would it be beneficial? Okay, so this is especially good because, as I said, the money just grows as you keep putting money in. So the more years that you have the 529 plan, the more money will be in it. The money generally belongs to the parent or the person who opened the plan. It doesn't belong to the child. It still belongs to the parent. Anybody can add money to the 529 plan. So this is another really, really big advantage. So you can say to, your aunt or your grandmother or your friend, hey, instead of giving my son money for his birthday, do you want to just put some money in his 529 plan for college? So anybody would be able to do that. And if you have generous friends and relatives, it's a great way to get them helping with that college tuition. Okay. You do have to say when you open the plan, who is going to be the student going to college, also called the beneficiary. So it could be you, it could be your child, it could be your nephew, it could be anyone, but you do have to name that person. However, so a good question to ask would be, okay, I've opened this plan for my oldest son, and then I saved all this money, but now my oldest son doesn't want to go to college. So that's fine. Then you can simply transfer the money to be going to the benefit or paying the tuition of someone else, okay, another relative. So if your oldest child decides not to go to college, you don't lose the money. You can simply transfer it to your next child who may well be going to college. Okay, so you don't usually have any problems with losing the money. You can just transfer it to somebody else. Okay, so that's quite a lot to listen to, but just be aware these 529 plans are very, very good. And again, there are people that you can talk to. So just Google it, see which one looks like a good plan, and then get more information about that, especially if you have quite a few years to save. These are very, very good savings plans. All right. Are there any questions? Otherwise, back to Deb.
I can ask if in the last sentence, if I can be transferred to other relatives, you can?
Yes, you can transfer it to other relatives. And that's a really good question to ask before you open the plan is, what other relatives can I transfer it to? So definitely siblings, yes. Further away relatives, I don't know specifically, but that's a really good question to ask when you choose the plan, because sometimes different plans have different rules, okay? Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about things that you need to do when you're thinking about college, right? Now, when you've decided that you're ready and that you're going to apply to college, again, and we had this discussion last week as well, you have to decide which schools you like for the things that you want to do. Okay, and I think when we talked last week, a lot of you had already thought about schools that you would like to go to. So what do you have to do then? You have to fill out applications. Applications are those big forms that Anne was talking to you about that say who you are, what you want to do, where you live, what kind of money you have, what kind of money you're going to need. and what you want to major in. Major means what is the field that you're interested in. So some of you said nursing or nursing assistant. I think we had an astronaut and some other interesting fields, but those are things that will be asked in your application. And often you have to do some essays as well. Essay means it's a little written exercise. It's usually not too long, but you will have to do that as part of your application. Now, the other thing that happens is because you're going to want to get some student aid, some federal money that we talked about at the beginning, that Ann talked about, those federal grants from the US government. You have to fill out this form that is called FAFSA. And the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That is a form that you only fill out once, no matter how many schools you apply to. Okay, so all the schools use the same one form because it's electronic. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you go do that immediately as soon as you decide you want to go to college, because some schools give out money on what we call a first come, first serve basis. And that means the first people who ask, they start giving out money. So if you come in later, the monies could be all gone. And so it's very important to do that really, really quickly. And again, we've given you the website here. It's fafsa.ed.gov. And this is the logo that they use, okay? So again, when Raul sends you the whole package later, you'll have all of these websites available to you. And then you need to look for any other grant or scholarship. And Ann described that to you in a pretty large amount of detail, but you have to do a lot of your own research. Okay, and like she said, there will be different grants and scholarships that depend on who you are, what your ages are, whether it's you or your children, and what fields you're interested in and what schools. And you want to go to your college that has what we call a financial aid office. So they have people who are there to help you find money. You don't have to do it all yourself. We're telling you how to do some of these things yourself, but it's very important that you go get the people who know how to do this, that they do this for a living, that they're professionals. They can help you out of the financial aid office. And then you can use the internet, obviously. But what you might want to do, even if you're using the internet, is check in with the financial aid office about some of the things that you found so that you can ask them what they think, whether they think those are good ideas or not, okay? So I don't think last week we asked you this, but has anybody actually applied to college yet, or are you just still thinking about it, you or your children? Put it in the chat box or talk to us. Anybody? No? Is that a no? Not yet. Okay, no, but thinking no. Okay, all right, very good. So we've given you a lot to think about before you do then, right? Okay, good. All right, so you do those applications, and then some college says, yes, we want you to come. And that's called acceptance. And that's a great thing. You should have a big party and celebrate, because by the time we get around to that, it will be okay to do that again. Okay, So what you want to do is, especially if you apply to a number of colleges, some different schools, you have to compare what each school is going to give you. So each school, remember, you put in your FAFSA that went to all the schools that you applied to. And then some schools said, we'll give you some money, and some schools said, we'll give you a different amount of money. And the costs for all of those schools will be different too. So what you want to do is you want to compare all of those acceptance letters, and you want to decide how much it's going to cost to go to those different schools, and then how much you're going to need money for if you are expecting scholarships and grants, and then how much you need to borrow from student loans. And we talked about all the different places you could get student loans, but you have to decide how much you need to borrow. And then you're going to go to that loan calculator, and you're going to figure out how much it's going to cost you with the loan payments and how long it's going to take you to pay it back. So all of those things mean that you should budget, you should plan. And remember, for some of you, you came to our budget presentation, which I think we're going to do again in June. But you want to make a budget so that you know how much you have to spend and how much you have to not spend to make this all work. Okay? Questions? Okay. You guys are quiet today. So let's just do a quick review of all the things that we did last week and this week. We talked about last week how you decide that you should go to college and that it's going to be a good thing. And today we talked about all the different ways to fund that college education, because it's going to be very expensive. You have to plan for it, and you have to understand all the different ways that you could pay for it. So we talked about grants and scholarships. Those are the ones where you get them usually from governments or organizations that you belong to and that you usually don't have to pay back. We talked about the money that could come from the federal United States government, from Maryland, from the state government, and then we talked about loans. And loans can come from governments, it can come from banks, it can come from other organizations, and all of those can be very different, and you really need to shop around. You need really to figure out what's the best way to do that, especially if you're going to go with a private lender, if you're not getting money from the government. We talked about saving for college. So saving, and I think Anne told you very important things. The longer that you can save ahead of time, the better off you are. And you can start with just little bits of money. You can open a 529 plan with $25. You can put money in a savings account. You can ask friends and relatives to help you save for college instead of giving you gifts. And saving for college is a good way to fund it because it means you don't have to borrow that money. And then we talked about last what to do when you're ready to go to college, and you do those applications, and then you figure out when you're accepted which school offered you a really good deal that you want to accept. So they accept you, you accept them, right? So it's a two-way thing. Okay, so in May, we're going to have another two-part series, and we're going to talk about other things other than traditional colleges. So that could be community college with associate's degrees instead of bachelor degrees, training for other, and talk about so academic. So being an electrician or a plumber, which are all very important things to do in our community and are very good paying jobs. Okay, so now we're back to opening it up to you all for questions or comments. And I'm hoping that this time when we ask, we'll hear from some of you.